AutoComplete, Roadshow's weekly podcast about the intersection of cars and technology. I'm Brian Cooley, editor-at-large. Tim Stevens, editor-in-chief, is off doing something you won't believe. We're going to check in with him in a few minutes. Kind of blew my mind. First, let's get some of the news out of the way here. Let's go for our weekly visit to Takata land, I'm afraid, where things blow up. Another death, unfortunately, is being attributed to these Takata airbags with defective inflators. This marks number 11 in a 2007 Civic, if you're keeping track. Takata says another 5 million cars in the U.S. may have bad inflators. That's on top of 24 million cars with a total of 28 million inflators that have already been identified. And if you can believe it, the government says there may be as many as 85 million bad Takata airbags in general in the U.S. fleet. And that's the big number if they were to assume that every Takata airbag inflator is bad until proven good by factory documentation. This is turning into mind-boggling stuff, is my takeaway for you here. And also, Ford has just launched one of the few formal recalls under the Takata situation. 400,000 04 to 06 Ford Rangers. So a specific model to add this week. 04 to 06 Ford Rangers, 400,000 of those are being now recalled for having bad Takata inflators that, as we have mentioned, cause deaths and serious injuries in a number of cases. Now, the other big grinding story, Dieselgate, kind of all quiet on the legal front going around right now with the whole VW Audi diesel mess out there. There's a change that is shifting, though, in the EU that is kind of seismic. A move now, not yet baked, where the EU, the overall EU zone authorities in Brussels, are moving now to say we want the ability to do automotive recalls in the EU zone, taking it up from the nation-by-nation level that is currently the practice. Now, that's going to have all kinds of political ramifications in terms of how a given country feels about the EU's role in that part of the world. But for those of us that are following automotive, it'd be a major shift in how car makers can be brought to heel for cars that need a recall, especially if it's for safety or environmental flagrant violation in that very important part of the world. By the way, if you're wondering where's the movie about Dieselgate, that, too, is apparently now under production. A movie that is called Backfire is apparently in pre-production from a guy named Steve Califer, who is two interesting things. He's a 3-time Oscar-nominated documentarian, and he owns 17 car dealerships, including the VW store in Flemington, New Jersey. If you're one of our New Jersey viewers, I think that's kind of halfway between New York and Princeton, if I'm not mistaken. He's got a VW shop there. So what do you know? A guy who comes from both sides of the industry seems like the right one to make a documentary on this mess. Oh, how about Keygate? We got so many gates going on right now. The GM ignition key situation. Seems like GM continues to be made of more or less some degree of Teflon. The latest case to be dealt with by them is that they have continued to fend off in either dismissals or in settlements every case that has come so far. We're still waiting for that one that totally sticks, if any of them do, that sets sort of a bar for what they owe a given plaintiff if there's serious injury or death caused by these ignition keys that pop out. Right now, they've paid $2 billion total in settlements and penalties, but we haven't seen that watermark case yet that says, here is the value to a plaintiff of a car with a defective GM key. Still waiting for that. An interesting push here by a number of car makers that came out this week. The heads of many automakers, not all of them, but many of the automakers that sell here in the U.S., made another formal appeal to the CEOs of auto insurance companies, the big ones here in the U.S. market, saying you need to get on board with us to be another party that is helping to push, publicize, and urge owners to get their cars fixed when they're under recall. This has been a big issue. In general, anywhere between a quarter and a third of all cars that have a recall on them here in the U.S. don't ever get fixed, don't get brought in for it. And it's seen to be one of the major pieces of low-hanging fruit is simply compliance. It's a free repair. The car maker is more or less obliged to do it for a very long time, 10 years typically, after the recall is issued, and yet people still don't get it done. A lot of it's because of communication. And the automakers are now urging the insurance companies, saying, wait a minute, you're right there in the crux of something people have to do to keep driving their car legally. Can't you become another one of those who is shaking a stick at people to get them to get their car recalls fixed, maybe even withholding approval of insurance until those recalls are all closed? Now, if you're of a certain age, you know that today's high-octane gas is not high-octane gas. 91, like we have here in the Bay Area, it's a joke. That used to be regular. 93 is considered premium in many other parts of the country, but there was a time when you could get, I think it was 102 at the pump from Sunoco. So today's high-octane gas really isn't, but that may change. A number of automakers at a very important Society of Automotive Engineers panel that went on in Detroit a few days ago have said, look, we have to get to the point where we have 95 octane minimum as what is called premium or high-octane gas. These were engineers in the powertrain divisions from Ford, General Motors, and Fiat Chrysler all agreeing, saying, yeah, absolutely. We have to get higher-octane gas because that will allow them to make higher and higher compression engines. And a high-compression engine that compresses that fuel and air mixture even more, even harder before detonating it, tends to get more power out of less fuel with fewer emissions. I mean, where do you go wrong there? You go wrong because with low-octane gas, you get really bad pre-detonation or spark knock that can damage the engine. At the very least, it ruins the efficiency of the engine. So there could be a dawn of higher octane gas coming, which we haven't seen that trend in decades. It's been going the other direction. If you're looking for the new Lincoln Continental, it got priced this week, $46,000 base with shipping. Looks as though it's going to be somewhere more to the mid to high 60s when you equip one nicely and get one of the higher range engines we've been talking about. And the Ford GT got priced this week as well, sort of, kind of. It's going to be in the mid 400s, Ford says, not too much far afield from what people were expecting. And they opened up a pre-order, well, really an application site. Unlike a pre-order with Tesla where you put down $1,000 for your Model 3, this is free. Anyone can apply for a period of time to be allowed to purchase one of the first few hundred Ford GTs at $450,000. However, you got to tell them a good story. It's kind of like buying a house in the Bay Area these days. You've got to do like a car buyer's biography and put together a book so they like you. Ford wants to see people who either have GT ownership history from the last GT. I bet huge bonus points if you own one of the original GTs, but you're probably a given if you're one of those. And has got a lot of history of ownership of Ford cars and Ford special performance vehicles. So basically, you've got to do a buyer's resume, and then maybe they'll deign to sell you one of these new Ford GTs at that rather lofty price. Now, I mentioned earlier that Tim is off doing something that you might not believe. This is sort of a weird mix of what Roger Moore wrote in the James Bond movie Spy Who Loved Me and a snowcat. Tim, what on earth are you doing /testing?
Hey guys, sorry I can't be with you this week. I'm up here in Toronto riding this thing. It's the DTV Shredder. It's a tank personal mobility device. It's kind of crazy. I'm going to get kind of filthy with it tomorrow. Look for coverage of this on the site in a couple of weeks, but coming up this week, we've got a lot of great reviews. We've got the BMW X1. We have my review of the McLaren 675 LT. We also have our first impressions of the super hot hatch, the Ford Focus RS, which I can't wait to drive myself. Lots more stuff on theroadshow.com as well, so check it out. But now back to you guys in the studio.
Okay, if that's not enough of what's coming up new on Roadshow, here's some more things you can find on the site right now while Tim gets that one baked. John Wong got an early ride in the S-Class Cabriolet along the Riviera. His life is obviously very difficult. Emmy Hall just back from Portugal, where she got a ride in the latest of the new 718 series Boxster with two engines. The base Boxster, which has a Turbo 4, of course, as well as the S Boxster with a Turbo 4, and yet they're very different in their road behavior. She'll tell you why. And I just took an interesting look a few days ago at a completely reimagined Ford Explorer that becomes inarguably the coolest, hippest, accessible vehicle for people that use a wheelchair. You can find that all those pieces and more over at theroadshow.com. When we come back, we're going to take a look at Tesla's facelift. I'm curious. I'll tell you what I think of it. Do you like it? And we'll also take a look at Tesla's recall when AutoComplete continues. Back to AutoComplete. I'm Brian Cooley from The Road Show. Tesla got a facelift. You know, this is unusual because Tesla doesn't really do model years. I mean, they technically have them for government registration, but they don't tout the new 16, 17, 15, what have you, Model S. They just kind of keep evolving all their cars. But here's one that you'll be able to spot very clearly. They've got a new face on the Tesla Model S as of this week. They unveiled it. I went online and kind of told a lot of folks I didn't think it looked very good. A lot of folks go the other way. A lot of folks agree with me. I think It's a very polarizing new look. It's got this sort of blank thermoplastic front end like most cars have, but of course they've gotten rid of the reindeer nose, that kind of black rounded pad in the front that, let's face it, was an analog for a grille that the car never needed in the first place. So I get why they say, what do we have this here for? But to me, it just looks kind of unfinished, a big, kind of too big expanse of just smooth plastic. I think it's a little devoid of detail, even though they have that little Tesla spear across the top, which I think saves it a bit. Everyone's going to have their opinion on this. It's an interesting sort of a small visual change in a company that doesn't make them very often. Well, it's a big visual change, to be honest. A Tesla recall, the Model X, which of course is still just getting into volume production. They had their first volume month in March. Beyond that, it was basically it was early production volume. It now has a recall that is pretty serious on the third row seat. Apparently, in some testing, Tesla found that seat can fold up in a crash. It's got a weak latch or an improperly engineered latch somewhere. So they're recalling them all to put a new latch in the third row, the way back seat, and have said, if you have one for now until you get it in for a recall, don't put anyone back there. Seems pretty stark. This hasn't happened in the wild, by the way, only in their crash testing. No one's had a problem yet on the road that we know of. If you're waiting for a Porsche Macan at your Porsche dealer and you're about losing your mind right now because the wait list has been long on these guys, things might ease up soon. A whole slew of Macans, 17s, just got released from some ports in the U.S. where they were sitting for weeks waiting for final U.S. EPA emissions certification. So they are finally heading to the dealer. There was some screw up there on getting that processed because cars should not get snagged at the port for long, if at all. Not because of this, anyway, and yet a lot of these cars did. This is not part of the VW Dieselgate thing. This is a separate issue, but they are now on their way to dealers, and yet Macan stocks are expected to be tight basically throughout this year, as I understand it. But the wait should get a little shorter, and hopefully if you've been waiting 6, 7, 8 weeks for years, it might finally now be on the way. So when the dealer tells you that this week, they're not lying this time. Toyota on its way to Michigan. We've told you a couple times here about it. Toyota is spending $1 billion on a major new effort to research autonomous cars and spending most of it at MIT and Stanford. This week they announced they're also going to spread some of that love, deservingly so, at University of Michigan, at the UMTRI, the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. So that's going to be their third campus, if you will, in this massive U.S. research effort, headed up by Gil Pratt, who's one of the smartest guys out there in autonomy. Certainly he's emerging as one of the big thinkers in a place where Toyota had been kind of reticent to play. A year ago, Toyota was saying the full autonomous car doesn't make sense to us. We just want to do some nice rich driver aids. Now all of a sudden they've turned on a dime and they're looking to push hard on AI, car-to-car, vehicle-to-infrastructure, and figuring out the logic of programming both the ethics and the AI learning of vehicles as they work through the world. So they've gotten really rich in a hurry, and they've put a lot of money behind it. This new center that they're going to be working on at Ann Arbor has the awkward name of the AACVTE, the Ann Arbor Connected Vehicle Test Environment. And again, their initial thrust there will be looking at V2V and V2I vehicle communication. If you have the Geek Squad come to your house anytime soon, don't be looking out the window for the little black and white Beetle. Those are basically done. For the first time in Geek Squad history, they're changing cars. They're picking up something, I don't know, it's a lateral, I think. They're moving from Beetles to Prius Cs. Now, the C, of course, is the little Prius, a personal favorite of mine, but it has not been that hot a seller. They are now moving to an order of 1,000 of those Prius Cs. They'll paint up the same way with the black and white fenders, roof, and door pattern there. By the way, they said this is not a decision they made because of Dieselgate. I mean, after all, they don't drive diesel Beetles. They drive gas Beetles in every case, as far as I know. But they did, interestingly, say that VW's diesel scandal sped up their decision to abandon VW and go to Prius. I guess they don't want the stink of driving something that is involved in a scandal like that, even remotely touching them. That's how broad that one spreads. That's AutoComplete episode 14 for April 13th. I'm Brian Cooley. We'll see you next week with the latest on news of the intersection of cars and technology.